first round of presentations for this conference. And that this session would focus on sharing current local and global efforts to map the extent and health of Nigeria's mangroves alongside knowledge gaps that need addressing and research opportunities. This session is titled The State of Nigerian Mangroves, What We Know and What We Don't. And to take on this session to bring us presentations with three presenters. The first presenter, and they'll come in that order. The first presenter from the Department of Animal and Environmental Biology, University of Port Harcourt, is Professor Aroloye Nombere. I hope I got the pronunciation well. Apologies for any wrong pronunciation. And then following him will be research scientist from the Biospheric Sciences Lab, NASA, will be joining online. I want to believe she's already online, all right? In the person of Dr. Temilola Fatoyinbo. And after her would have the Managing Director of Blue Carbon Solutions, Dr. Ebuka Nwobi. So we would give our presenters 15 minutes each to make their presentations, beginning with Professor Aroloye Nombere. Please, Prof, kindly come and take the stand.
Today I'm going to talk about mangroves from my own perspective and research. And I just did a 40-slide document, but I don't think I will exhaust it in the next 15 minutes, so I will just rush through it. But most of them are pictorial. So they say a picture speaks 1,000 words. So wherever I will emphasize on, I will just mention that quickly. So this is just, I'm sorry to say that, but I just have to start on a sorry note. What the mangroves is facing presently in the Niger Delta area. I wish the Minister of Environment were to be here so that he will appreciate that when we talk about mangrove devastation, I think, I don't know any other part of Nigeria where we have it as much as it is in River State because of oil and gas exploration. So that is an incident that happened in 2010 when I began my PhD work. I just went there and saw the devastation that was created by just an oil spill. So this is just a brief outline. This is just an intro showing us the what mangrove is all about. And I believe that most of us that are here, we may not be experts on mangrove ecology. So I just did that slide to tell us what the mangrove is all about. The mangroves actually are found in salty environment, and there are about 123 species globally. But in Nigeria, we have basically the red, the black, and the white mangroves. We also have other species, Cunicarpus. Then we also have the Nipa palm, which is classified as mangroves too. That is also part of what is devastating the mangroves. But through DNA analysis, we have found out that the Nipa palm, they have actually diverged. And we have another species of Nipa palm called Astrocarium aculeatum. So we can see that the devastation is something that is not only oil and gas exploration, but also from the Nipa palm, as was mentioned by the Minister of Environment. Then they are found mostly in tropical area. They hardly go to the temperate region. Then we have like I mentioned, they are halophilic, found in salty environments. Now we have, I've listed about 11, but there are more than that. Some usefulness of mangrove, the ecosystem services they offer, like was mentioned, you know, herbs and so on are got from the mangroves. Then we also have the fishery population. I just did a jotting here just to let us know, like we have over 200 species of fish. Time will fail me. I would have given you some of them. Now in the Niger Delta area, specifically in River State, we have mostly the tilapia, we have the croaker, and we have the mullets. There are a lot of them. Now they're also used for recreation and other activities. Then we have the climate regulation, which is a very significant aspect of the mangroves. Like today's world, we are talking about climate change. The mangrove serves as one of the best environment that absorbs the carbon dioxide. So more or less in terms of, global warming, we see that the mangroves are very significant. This one is human environment interaction. We have both positive and negative aspects. Then crude oil, which I'm going to show you in the few slides to come. These are some of the things that lead to biodiversity extinction. Then we also have oil industry. You can see dots everywhere. So tell me how the mangrove will survive. It's difficult for them to survive under that kind of, you know, compressed environment. Then we also have some scenarios, like these are some my research site. You see the pipelines running through the mangroves. The one, Buguma and Okrika, these are two of my research sites. Then we have right of way. Anytime they are trying to create pipe, they need to bring down the mangroves. So you can see that sketch there shows that most times this pipeline offshore and onshore runs through the mangrove forest. Then you can see just a recent one. You can see my picture there. Then these are some of the recent situations we just got. This incident, all these ones I listed happened just last year, 2023. Then so pollution and all those things, you can see this one in Bordeaux that he mentioned where they are doing remediation. I don't know how effective it will be, but you can see that there is always re-oiling in that environment. Then you can see from the using ArcGIS, you can see areas, all these areas were covered by mangrove, but you can see that they are going off. This one is even some years back. Presently, there is no mangrove there right at that point. But this is also a study we did. You can see the greenish parts are where the mangroves were 20, 30 years ago, but of present, it's even worse now. That was still 2007. These are some of the studies we did. We can also see the mangroves are going. Then there is locational shift. Then this one also shows there are oil and gas exploration. Places where you have high exploration activity, you have more mangrove degradation. Then we also have, this one is currently happening in the place they call Eagle Island in River State. This one is just 2023, but as I've gotten a record of the current situation, you see the land being eaten away by the tide because the mangroves groups that hold them together, they are no longer there. So you see tidal erosion occurring in that environment. And this is just a conceptual diagram to show what I'm saying. So there's a pressure from the seaward direction, there's a pressure from the landward direction where people are developing. So at the end of the day, we don't know where the mangrove, when it becomes tiny, we don't know where the mangroves will be growing again. Then these are some of the livelihood situations, opportunities that will go definitely when the mangroves go, because that is one of the topic of this conference, livelihood for the locals. Then these are some studies we've done. I won't waste my time on that, showing the effect of hydrocarbon pollution. You can see the crabs. These are things the locals feed on. So tell me how they won't have organ failure when you take high concentration of pollutants into your system. I will know what biomagnification is, those of us that are in the science field. So these are some studies. These are practical situations. They're just not cock and bull stories. They're real. Then we have the crabs. You can see the concentration. Then I'll just quickly go to the end because I believe my time is almost up. But there's a place where I will emphasize on concerning what we need the way forward. And that is very significant to my talk today. But all these ones are studies. You can see these crabs. All these things are under the fishery category, the land crab, the water crab. Then you see what is happening there. bed. Most of the land bed, they lay their eggs inside the soil, but that one is gone because of pollution. These are all practical situations. They are not just drawings. These are what I took during my field work. But I took this one about 2 weeks ago. These are some species that we discovered, about 5 or 6 of them, the periwinkles, the clams. So all these things are things that, because when they say degradation of the mangrove, people think it's just the trees alone. Species are going, biodiversity is going. So these are things we are talking about when we talk about mangrove degradation. So this one also is a scenario. You see high iron concentration, then total petroleum hydrocarbon. They're all high in most of our studies. Then now, this is the part I want to, let's have like a thought pattern. What do we do? Because when you talk about protecting biodiversity, we look at in terms of the environmentalist view. We have the development viewpoint, preservation viewpoint, we have the conservation viewpoint. So which view do we take at the end of the day? And that's the note I will leave us with. Now, development, we want to keep developing. They are building houses. They want to do coastal roads. Like this is the project the federal government is about embarking on. Mangroves will go. So do we keep developing and losing our biodiversity? Then we talk about the preservation viewpoint concept. Now, the last line there, on red, people must balance development and preservation for the sake of future generations. So when all these things go, so the future generation may not. So this is the aspect we are talking about. Now, my recommendation before I round off for today is the laws. We have to strengthen it. We have very fantastic laws, but most times these laws are not followed. Lack of compliance, lack of enforcement. These are the things leading to the destruction of the mangrove. Even every other thing in the country, we must have the laws, but they are not operational. Then we also look at habitat protection, which is being emphasized by most of the NGOs. Then we also have limited and strict protection. Now, those areas where we have the mangrove, like the minister mentioned, Calabar and so on. But the situation in River State, what do we do? There's no protection. Now, you create a park in a particular part of the country, then you don't create a park in other places. Those species there will go extinct. So by the time you finish here, you go to that place, you have none of these things still there. Then in terms of my concluding notes, we have to weigh cost and benefits to help balance the opinion and decisions. We have to weigh them. We want to develop at the same time. We want to protect. So which one will have the day? Have their way at the end of the day. Now these are economic projects, very good. But for instance, if you are building roads, you are building infrastructure and in wetland area, we know it's a sensitive environment. When this wetland go, what do we bequeath to future generations? I have a lot to say actually, but I will just stop here so that during the question and answer session, probably I will have some more explanation to make. Then in the last line, the question is, are we weighing the long and short-term benefits? You do the road today, we enjoy it, but what's the long-term benefit? We know of erosion, tidal coastal problem that is happening in Lagos. Most of you know what's happening in Lekki, because we are actually encroaching into nature's parts. And I pray that maybe at the end of the day, we will have some idea on how to stop this kind of situation in the country. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we would go next to our virtual presenter. I think she's ready for us. Once again, just to introduce her and to welcome her, research scientist, Biospheric Sciences Lab, NASA, the person of Dr. Temilola Fatoyinbo.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here. Very honored to be able to present today. I thought that today I would be speaking about Nigeria's mangroves in the global context, and I'm so glad to have heard the previous presentations that really provided a really thorough background on mangroves and especially Nigeria's mangroves. So to introduce myself very quickly, I am a mangrove ecologist and remote sensing scientist at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center in Maryland, where most of my work has been focused on conducting research both in the field and from satellites and airborne measurements on mangrove forests. I've done this worldwide, but really with a focus on Africa's mangroves. And I also lead a team that has been focused on mapping, monitoring, and understanding mangroves and other coastal and blue carbon ecosystems worldwide. So today I will be outlining a few existing studies and efforts that are focused on mangroves both globally and in Nigeria. So just to give a little bit of context and provide some images on what these mangrove ecosystems look like and what they are, we've heard a lot of this already, so I'll go quite quickly. Mangroves are trees that grow in the intertidal zone, so in areas with salt water and brackish water where land meets sea. And they only do this in tropical and subtropical regions worldwide. As we heard, they provide a large number of ecosystem services, and they are present in about 114 countries worldwide. However, despite their ecological and economic importance, they're also highly vulnerable, and it's estimated that on a global scale, between 50 and 60% of mangroves have been lost, despite all the ecosystem services that they provide, of which we are especially interested now in the amount of carbon that they store and their biodiversity harbor. So in these pictures here, I'm showing mangroves in the Florida Everglades. However, the mangroves in Nigeria look very similar. The species that are on the Atlantic are very similar on both sides of the Atlantic. And some of the consequences of these losses is that you end up with these exposed soils in mangroves that I'm showing in the middle picture that result in large amounts of carbon emissions to the atmosphere. And also you no longer are able to harbor biodiversity as you would before. So just to give you really quickly a background on some of the ecosystem services that mangroves provide on a global scale, of course, they provide livelihoods to about 120 million people that live close to mangroves worldwide. They provide wood for a source of timber and fuel, coastal protection, water filtration. In many countries, they're a very important tourism, a very important area for tourism with people who like to do visits of the mangroves or fishing or kayaking tours. Of course, they provide a very important habitat for fish species, about over 3,000 fish species, many of which are important commercially and important for people's livelihoods. And then finally, there's the climate regulation aspect of mangroves, where recent studies have shown how important mangroves are in terms of absorbing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and storing it in both the trees and the soil. And I will be speaking about that a little bit more later. Now, I would say that generally speaking, mangroves have often been understudied, especially in the field. And as you can see from this picture, it is quite clear why. It's very, very difficult to conduct field work in mangroves. Here I'm showing some pictures from institutes or field measurements that were carried out in Gabon, where you find some of the tallest mangroves in the world. And as you can see, it's very difficult to just get around. How do you measure, how do you get measurements from these trees when you have to go through mud, climb over roots or climb under roots, and essentially are working in a very, very difficult and harsh environment? So this is one of the reasons why using satellite imagery and doing remote sensing is really a big advantage in mangrove forests, because it helps you avoid having to deal with these very, very difficult conditions. But this is also one of the reasons why mangroves are generally understudied in many regions of the world when it comes to field measurements. And this is also, I think, very highly the case in Nigeria. And I believe we will be hearing most likely from some of the most important and really interesting field studies that have happened in the Niger Delta, possibly in the next presentation. So as we've heard in, I think, almost every talk that we've heard before, mangroves are very important when it comes to storing carbon and climate regulation. And so I wanted to provide a little bit of context as to what we mean by that. So when you look at this graph on the left, essentially what it's doing is comparing the amount of carbon that mangrove ecosystems are able to store. So mangroves store carbon in the tree, so in tree trunks as wood, as all forests do. But in addition to storing the mangroves in what we call above ground biomass, or above and below in like the biomass of the actual forest, mangroves also store very, very large amounts of carbon in the soils beneath them. And as you can see here on this graph on the left, if you look at the soils component here in the gray, studies have shown that mangroves store, multiples of the soil carbon that other types of forests store, including tropical forests. And one of the reasons, the reason why they do this is because of the environment that they live in. So mangroves grow in the coastal zone. It's an area that's constantly inundated, and so the soils have are oxygen depleted. And essentially what this means is that these areas, you just have soil accumulating, you have leaves and roots and upland soils that essentially accumulate and are stored, and all of the carbon in the soil is stored. It's some of it is exported into the ocean, but it's not emitted back into the atmosphere as it would in other types of ecosystems. So that's one of the advantages of mangroves and mangrove soils. They essentially build these peat soils, which are very, very important carbon stocks and can be really deep. So in this example here, this is an example from mangroves in the Indo-Pacific. So this is from Indonesia, where they found very deep soils and then also very high carbon concentration soils. So the combination of those two means that you get very large stocks of carbon in the soil. And I believe that based on what I've read and some discussions with scientists in Nigeria, that the soils in the Niger Delta, for example, and in Nigeria are comparable in depth to those in Indonesia and also in carbon stocks. However, there have been very few studies done on how much carbon is actually stored in the soils of mangroves in Nigeria. So this is a really important area of research. And also for planning of climate mitigation and carbon credits. Another reason why mangroves are very important for carbon dioxide sequestration or uptake of carbon dioxide is that mangrove trees actually have very high sequestration rates. And what this basically means is that they take up a lot of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, much more than other types of forests do, on a daily basis or on a yearly basis. And essentially this is because they grow so fast. So mangroves grow very fast in a very dynamic environment. They're able to, by going through photosynthesis, they take up a lot of carbon dioxide and then they store it much more than other types of forests do. So both the storage capacity of mangroves on the long term is high, and how much they're able to take up on a daily to yearly basis is also very high. And so this is why they're seen as such important what we call blue carbon stocks, or such important ecosystems when it comes to climate mitigation, because they're able to take up a lot of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere quickly, and then they also can store it, even though they only cover a very small portion of the coastline globally. I think it's about 3% of all forests only are mangroves. So to put this in a kind of a Nigeria in the global context, Nigeria actually has the 5th largest extent of mangrove in the world, and this is after countries like Indonesia, Brazil, Mexico, and Australia. It has about 844,000 hectares of mangrove. And to put it in a little bit of context, when you look at the size of Brazil, Mexico, Australia, and Indonesia, you'll realize that these are countries that are much larger in size than Nigeria is. And yet Nigeria has almost the same exact extent of mangroves as Australia and Mexico, for example, even though the coastline is much shorter and the country in general is much smaller. So Nigeria actually has one of the largest, if not the largest extent of mangrove per unit area of all countries, at least of all these 5 countries. Nigeria also has by far the largest extent of mangroves in Africa. The next two countries are Mozambique and Guinea, and they have less than half of the mangrove extent that Nigeria has. And it's also been proposed that the Niger Delta region is the largest contiguous mangrove system in the world. So the largest area of where you have mangroves that are joining each other. So Nigeria is really one of the most important countries when it comes to mangrove ecosystems. So much of the work that I've done has been focused on understanding the carbon stocks and the ecosystem structure of mangrove forests worldwide. So here I wanted to highlight a global map of canopy height, of biomass and carbon stocks that I produced with my colleagues back in 2019. And also wanted to note that we have now produced an updated version. So we do have canopy height maps for Nigeria that allow us to estimate biomass maps for more recent timeframes. But what I think is really important here is when you look at the table on the right, again, looking at what percentage of the global carbon stocks Nigeria covers or harbors, it's about 5% of global carbon stocks. You'll notice that Indonesia is such a large country with such a large coastline that when it comes to mangroves, it always dominates the mangrove story. But if you take out Indonesia, you'll see that Nigeria really has a large portion of the global mangrove carbon stocks. And this is despite the fact that we already know that these mangroves are very degraded and have been undergoing lots of change over the past 50 years. Also, to put into context, I wanted to show a little bit what the global drivers are of mangrove forest loss on a global scale. So in a study that we did, we looked at what the main drivers were of forest loss in mangroves and what the rates of change and the patterns are that we find. So very quickly, on a global scale, the biggest drivers of mangrove loss are shoreline erosion, much of which is due to sea level rise. We have commodities such as aquaculture and agriculture. You have things like extreme weather events, which are essentially drought, hurricanes, cyclones, and then what we call non-productive conversion is mostly cutting. And then you have some areas where you have multiple types of changes happening at the same time. So this is where you'll then experience the coastal squeeze, where you have inland deforestation and then seaward erosion or sea level rise that is impacting mangroves from two sides. And so when you look on a global scale, 62% of losses resulted from direct human effects, so from land use change in the past from 2000 to 2016. Most of those losses were really occurred in Southeast Asia. But another result of this study was that when you looked at the pattern of how those losses were happening, globally there was actually a decline in the mangrove deforestation rate due to human intervention. So there was a global decline in human-driven mangrove loss. And what we're seeing is that there is an increase in climate-driven mangrove losses. So an increase in mangrove losses due to sea level rise and changes in precipitation patterns and storms such as cyclones and hurricanes. Now, this pattern is really prevalent on a global scale, but it's a very different pattern that we're actually seeing in Nigeria. So we've heard before, there are many threats to Nigeria's mangroves, including oil pollution, clearance, other types of deforestation for farming, roads and urban development. And then there's the invasive Nipa palm encroachment. So based on some of my calculations and maps that we've produced on my team, we found that since 1995, there's been about 50,000 hectares of mangroves that have been lost directly. So this is 50,000 hectares of deforestation due to a range of causes. But in total, about 14% of Nigerian mangroves have been lost, and this is due to a combination of oil pollution, Nipa palm, and cutting. In fact, mangrove, and when you look at this in a global context, mangrove loss in Nigeria represents about 9% of all global mangrove losses since 1995. So Nigeria does have a disproportionate a disproportionate proportion of mangrove loss when you compare to other global numbers. And what we found is that contrary to global patterns of decreasing mangrove loss rates since 2000, in Nigeria, we find an increasing trend in mangrove losses since 2000, with the largest losses occurring in the period from 2010 to 2015. However, some of our studies have also shown that in the past that from 2020 to 2023, we're also seeing an increase of mangrove deforestation or mangrove losses. Here, I wanted to provide you with a map of some of the studies that we've done. We're working on updating mangrove extent maps from 1995 onward, so that we would have updated mangrove extent maps at least for every 5-year period. Or at least have maps of where the changes are happening for every 5-year period. And as mentioned before, River State really dominates the areas where you see loss. So everything here that's green is mangrove extent, and everything that is red is where areas where we're seeing loss of mangroves. Also, as mentioned before, and as well known, there's really a co-location of oil spills and oil pollution with areas of loss. So here, what you're seeing on the bottom left is a map where we downloaded the Nostra oil spill reports and put them on a map and on satellite imagery, calculated the frequency or produced a heat map so that you can see where most of the oil spills are happening. And when you co-locate that with areas of loss, you could really see that there's this direct correlation between the two. And on the top inset here, what I'm showing is essentially a first estimate of a year of loss of when these losses are happening in the region. So everything that is in the cyan blue, for example, is where you have losses that happened between 2010 and 2016. And you can really see how there's a large amount of areas that are blue, especially when you compare to any of the other colors. So most of those losses really happened in that time frame.
Okay, Dr.
Yeah.
Dr. Thank you very much. Can you wrap it up in the next 2 minutes? Your time is actually.
No problem.
Thank you.
Very quickly, I also wanted to highlight the issue of the Nipa palm, which we heard before about, and which we might hear about again later. But just to mention that Nipa palm was introduced to Nigeria around 1906, but the big expansion of Nipa palm has really happened in the past few years, I think in the past 20 years or so. And also to highlight that a study that we recently carried out where we were mapping the invasive Nipa palm species in Cross River State. And just to highlight some of these, I think, rather important and shocking numbers, we found that Nipa extent doubled in the past 5 years. So just from 2015 to 2020, Nipa extent doubled in the Calabar estuary. And we found that at this current rate, mangroves could be entirely replaced by Nipa in about 5 years from now. And with that, I just wanted to highlight also, we might have my slides, that we have many online, we have many of our assets and maps that are available online. And here we have, for example, a global canopy height map. We have maps of lost drivers. We're currently working on getting the Nigeria data online as well. And I'm happy to take any questions or get any comments from you later. I most likely won't be able to be here for the whole presentation because I'm calling from the US and it's currently 5 o'clock in the morning. So I'll have to leave soon, but thank you.
Managing Director, Blue Carbon Solutions, Dr. Ebuka Nwobi.
Good morning, everyone. I would like to thank SDN and USAID. I'm very excited that this is happening, and I hope that in the future, this will continue to happen. And specifically on my presentation is focused on how research can be the best and only foundation to anything we do with regards to conservation and restoration of mangroves. My two earlier speakers have definitely proven that point to us already with the extensive research that has been done both in country and externally on mangroves. Again, my name is Ebuka. I'm founder of Blue Carbon Solutions, but I'm also the GIS lead at West Africa Blue, where we aim to establish high quality carbon projects. I think there's no need to say it anymore. My two previous presenters and the keynote addresses have mentioned the importance of mangroves and given a good introduction. What I'm going to focus on are these 3 points. Nigeria has the largest in Africa, together with 4 other countries. Now, this is not just Nigeria or Africa. Globally, Nigeria, together with 4 other countries, has half of the mangrove extent in the world. It's 50% in the whole world, together with 4 countries, both horizontally in extent and vertically in carbon. Nigeria has 50% together with 4 other countries. And remember, we have over almost 150 countries with mangroves globally. So that puts into perspective the importance of mangroves, of Nigerian mangroves on a global context. The second point is because of how Nigeria is, because of how Nigerian mangroves are horizontally and vertically, they are the 3rd most important mangrove globally because of the amount of carbon it stores and the extent that we have in the whole world. So it's just setting the scene of how important Nigerian mangroves are and how important we do something about it. Again, I'll just briefly talk about the benefits and the threats of mangroves in Nigeria specifically. We've heard a lot about fisheries, and I think USA definitely mentioned how important it is in fisheries, more importantly, women in small-scale fishery. Nigeria is the only country globally that has over 85% of fishes being dependent on mangroves. You know, you just put that in context. Small-scale fishery, if you think of the population of Nigeria, over 85% of the fisheries depend on mangroves. So that puts into perspective the importance of mangroves in fishery and livelihood, which is one of the aims of this conference. Coastline protection. I don't know how many people have seen that amazing video on Twitter that shows a miniature mangrove, and it's a machine that generates waves. And you can see how, because of mangroves, it stops the waves from actually getting to the communities. If you just Google mangrove miniature, you would see it. It's an amazing video. And that is one of the importance, one of the benefits of mangroves in Nigeria. I can't imagine how Nigerian coastline would be if we didn't have mangroves. So definitely very important. Carbon storage, Lola has said it a lot. That picture on the bottom shows, you know, the depth of that mangrove. So all those things you're seeing there is the mangrove soil, and I don't think it's even, I think it's deeper than that when you have even lower tide. So all that is the amount of carbon that is stored in Nigeria. This picture was taken from somewhere in River State. And you can see that there is mangroves. Going back to Lola's presentation, the trees has equal number of carbon stored as other tropical forests. The difference is the soil. Now, if you take off all those trees on top of it, all that soil is lost. So you can imagine that all that soil is probably be stored for hundreds of years, 200 years, and then it takes 1 day to take that off, and in the space of 5 years, what has been stored for over 500 years is lost to the atmosphere. So just something for us to think of when we're talking about conserving mangroves in Nigeria. And lastly, the cultural value. I remember during one of my field work in Ikotabasi, I was just working in the community preparing for my field. I just spoke to one boy. I said, "Oh, I'm doing mangrove stuff." And he just stood there and told me the importance of mangrove. He literally told me all this slide. And this is someone who lives in local community. So they definitely know the importance of mangrove. So I think just highlighting some of them, this is not all, but the importance and the benefits of mangrove in Nigeria. Again, I'll talk very briefly on the slide. It's been covered already. One of the points I will touch on is the unsustainable resource use. We've heard a lot about pollution, be it oil pollution, pollution from other industries. You know, we always talk about oil pollution, but you think of all the other industries that are lined along the coastline, where are their waste products going to? If they go to the water, it ends up in mangroves, and that can impact mangroves. If we speak about the resources, we've spoken about the importance of mangroves. The timber that you get from mangrove is used for construction, is used for building fish cages, is used for so many things by local communities. But how is that harvested? How is that being cut from the mangrove? If you cut it in a good way, you keep the tree standing. You cut it in a very bad way, you lose the tree. So that way you've used the resource and then made it unavailable to yourself and to other people. So that's something else we need to think about. It's one of the threats to mangroves, how you actually use it. Obviously, Nipa palm competition has been spoken about. It's funny how if you go to the field, you see where Nipa palm is competing with mangrove. It's almost like a film, because you look at it and you see a place where mangrove has been cut, and then you have this open ground. You go away, you come back 2 weeks later, you see lots of Nipa seedlings. You go away 2 weeks later, you see the Nipa seedlings going up, and then you then see some of the mangroves coming back, because mangroves are good at naturally regenerating. But what you end up finding is maybe like 2 or 3 years later, you come back, but Nipa palm has won the battle because the mangrove has been affected. So that's one of the problems we have. And again, that bottom picture, you see that the Nipa palm is now taking over the shoreline area of the mangroves. Because Nipa palm doesn't have the root system that mangrove has, that soil, if you give it, I can't remember when I took that picture, but I'm pretty sure if I go to that area now, that whole soil that I was talking about has gone down into the water. And that's what we call carbon bombs, because the intricate root system of mangrove isn't there anymore to protect it. So one of the results of Nipa palm winning the competition with mangroves is you have all this erosion happening. The erosion is also naturally caused by climate change, sea level rise, high wave action, but also the winning of that competition with Nipa palm and mangroves results in erosion as well. So I'm going to focus a little bit on Nipa palm and why it's a big threat to mangroves in Nigeria. Lola has definitely explained the introduction in the early 1900s and the lack of management. Management, very important thing when you're dealing with any conservation effort. It wasn't managed, and it's now outcompeting degraded mangroves. I specify degraded mangroves because sometimes mangrove does fight back. As long as they're not affected, as long as you leave mangrove to do their thing, they will, outcompete Nipa, because that is their natural ecosystem. It also lowers biodiversity. Again, that was mentioned by Dr. Numbere, and he definitely mentioned where you see crabs and oysters. That picture on the top right, again, showing the competition between Nipa and mangrove. If you look at the mangrove tree, is very rough, and that gives a surface for other organisms to latch onto. But if you look at the Nipa palm stem, it's very smooth. Nothing can stay on it. So that is one of the effects of Nipa palm. It reduces biodiversity in the mangrove ecosystem. Again, sediment accretion, because again, the root system isn't there, the soil isn't sticking together, you're losing carbon. In terms of what we can do going forward, I think it's very important that we pay particular attention to what is being done, what research is being done in Nigeria. Nigeria has a long coastline, from Lagos to Cross River, River State, Bayelsa. There are lots of universities that line up that whole coastline. There's lots of research that has been done, but they are all isolated. I tell you, if you have another conference like this that's focused on just what research has been done, this whole place will be filled up with what has been done. And that can create a foundation to what we need to conserve and protect mangroves in Nigeria. How long can we say Nipa palm is an invasive species? It's been here for years. It's not going anywhere. Can we use it for something? I have seen some papers about it being a bioenergy. I've seen lots of videos on YouTube in Indonesia. It's a very nice delicacy. They mix it with plantain, mix something like a porridge. Can we do something like that? And also, we should do something about sustainable mangrove use. I'm going to speak a bit about what we do at West Africa Blue. We generate high-level conservation and restoration projects in West Africa. If you go to our website, we have a living labs tab where we document everything we do. We have things about mangrove assessment methodology. We have things about benefit sharing agreements we have with local communities. And we also we make sure we're involved with the local stakeholders. We make sure that there's that conversation going on from the government to private sectors to local communities, and that increases the capacity we build in any country we go to. And the process we get to from thinking we want to do a project here to actually starting that project. We do some GIS work. We say, right, this is deforestation happening in red. These are the stable mangroves in green. And then we map potential restoration areas, which are in blue. And they say, oh, well, we can restore here potentially. We know where mangroves are being lost. Then the next step we do is we actually go to the communities because they know more than anything. You know, they live with these mangroves. They will tell you 100 years history of mangroves. So we go there, we find out, right, what is actually happening here. They speak to us, we speak to them. We hire some of them to do some of the field work. We work together. And then we go to the field. We take pictures of what's actually happening on the ground. We collect biomass data. We collect soil data. We collect drone imagery. And we use all this to inform us to make a decision of what project we do in any country we go to. And the end result of this is we end up with high-level projects where you can't refute it because we have all this information we've gathered from the GIS analysis, from the field, and from the local communities. That in the end, there's nothing you can just say, oh, these guys have done their homework and we have produced this high-level project that you can bank on to generate carbon credits. And more importantly, add value to the communities we go to because we have involved them in the process. So just to end, this is my final slide. Again, I like to go back to my PhD research because during my master's, I remember wanting to do a mangrove project, and then my supervisor told me, "Oh, you can't do a project in Nigeria. It's very difficult." And I went to one university in Nigeria, and they laughed at me and said, "Have you been to mangroves before? I don't think you can do field work." They looked at me and thought, "Oh, you can't do it." But this International Day for the Conservation of Mangrove Ecosystems started in 2015. And I think what the UN wanted out of this is something that we are doing now. You know, it's next week is actually going to be 9 years. So I don't know if that was the plan, SDN, if you thought about it and thought, oh, let's put it this week is a week before this. Good planning if that was the aim. But next year is going to be 10 years. And I think Nigeria can make use of this opportunity to do something about the importance of mangroves in Nigeria before that decade, because I think it would be a good way to showcase to the world how important we're taking care of this system. And I think one thing we can do is one of the points I mentioned earlier is to have a national database of mangrove data. Again, it's all there. You know, Dr. Numbere, has said a lot. He has so many slides, so many research. If you go to another university in Lagos, they will probably give you so many research they are doing. You know, all the different universities. All you need is just one conference, and you will see how much research has been done on mangroves. And no matter what pact, what policy you're doing, anything you want to do, you have to go back to that science because that is the only thing that would inform what you're doing. Think of mangrove restoration. If you go online and say mangrove restoration, there's lots of failures in mangrove restoration because sometimes it's not, the foundation isn't the science. So what I'm saying is in the next year, if it's possible, we do one conference, one academic conference on mangroves in Nigeria. And then we pull together everything we've learned from that research in one place. It's probably something the minister was talking about. In one place, we have it somewhere, for example, on like a Google area. It's kind of the same thing Lola showed. You can pull these things together, and it's free once it's an academic exercise or it's a government exercise. It's free. We pull this together. You know, people can go there, see what's happening. You just draw a small polygon and it gives you the results of what's happening there over time. But you can't do that if you don't have all this data together. And And I think the most important thing is thinking of the future generation, that once you do something like that, you have a base where people who are interested in mangroves can go back to and actually do this research. So thank you for listening. I'll be available for questions and everything. I'll leave with this remark from the Director General of UNESCO from last year's World Mangrove Day. And she said, in our societies, we need to become aware of the value, the beauty, and the vulnerability of mangrove. And we need to come together to commit ourselves to protecting them. Thank you.
Let's give him another round of applause. Thank you very much. I want to believe that the slides are available to be shared to participants after this time out. Thank you. So at this point, I would like to request if there are maximum of 2 interventions before we go for a walking tea. So I have a hand over there. Kindly introduce yourself. I have another one there. So just those 2. We go there first. Kindly introduce yourself, and then you go ahead with your intervention. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Andrew Dunn. I'm the Country Director for the Wildlife Conservation Society. I just have a quick question for Dr. Lola, which was a really interesting presentation. She said that we all know the dangers of nipper palm. She reported that the expansion of nipper palm is really accelerated in recent years, and she said that potentially nipper palm would completely replace mangroves in the next 5 years. I'm just interested why that expansion is increased, the rate of expansion has increased, and if there's anything we can do about it.
We'll go to Dr. Temilola to respond first, and then maybe the other 2 speakers would like to speak to that question. Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Temilola.
Thank you. And to clarify, based on the way we calculated the expansion rate is that we used, this is only focused on the Calabar estuary. So not to say that all of Nigeria's mangroves will be lost due to Nipa, but specifically in the Calabar estuary, where I think there has been a huge expansion of mangroves. And based on our study, we found actually that now more than half of the mangroves are actually Nipa palm. And so the main reasons for that is also what Ebuka talked about. It's, if you have a degraded mangrove, the Nipa, being a palm species, is able to encroach in degraded areas and grow much faster than a endemic mangrove tree would. And then once these palms are established, the mangroves cannot compete with them because the Nipa just grows so fast, and it's able to grow in areas that are degraded, that might have been undergoing, oil spills or other types of stressors, and the Nipa just comes in and takes over. Does that answer your question?
It does, thank you. Yes, and I'm speaking as a resident of Calabar, so it was disturbing. Is there anything we can do about it?
That's a great question, and I think Ebuka talked a little bit about the other uses of Nipa that are so Nipa is actually a mangrove species in Southeast Asia, even though it's also becoming invasive there, so expanding their extent. From what I've seen, there has actually been a huge there has been an area where a large tract of Nipa has been removed, and I will have to look exactly where it is. It's not in the Calabar estuary, but it's close. I'm not sure, to be honest. I think unless you do really large remediation where you're removing all of the Nipa and then doing replanting or allowing for the mangroves to grow naturally, I'm not sure, but this is something to maybe do some more to do some more research or to check on. And I would also be very interested in hearing whether what we're seeing from the satellite imagery is really also what you're seeing on the ground. We're seeing this huge expansion of Nipa, and it was quite shocking actually to do the mapping and to see how much of the mangrove has now been taken over by Nipa. And when you're looking just at satellite imagery, even if you look in Google Maps or Google Earth, it all looks the same, so you can't tell. But then we're using different types of satellite data, especially radar data, that has allowed us to differentiate the palm from hardwood species. And this is where we then saw, oh my goodness, there's this humongous extent of Nipa, much, much larger than previously recorded. And I would also, you know, Ibuka is there in person. As you've seen, he has actual pictures and he's been to a lot of these areas and he has done a lot of the research as well. So he might be a good person to talk to in person.
Some of the areas I had mapped as mangroves in the Cross River area. I remember going on the boat and I was trying to look for a site for mangrove field site. And I just kept seeing Nipa everywhere. And I was like, where's all the mangrove there? In a way, it's all gone. But I think the solution is more of it is a three-pronged approach, because you need to make sure that the mangrove that is there stays there, because that is the only way that Nipa palm would lose the competition. If the moment you start chopping mangroves down, Nipa is going to win. It doesn't even need to be a complete removal of mangrove. Even degraded mangrove, just cutting it down unsustainably, and then it needs, you know, more resources, more nutrients to grow back. The fact that Nipa is quicker is just going to use up that resource, because again, you know, this is a piece of land that they're managing the nutrients. You know, every plant fights for light, soil, water, nutrients. The moment you have more, and Nipa palm doesn't germinate the way mangrove does. Nipa palm, like one Nipa palm tree, I don't have the picture here, but it's the Nipa palm fruit is as big as my arm, if like a mature Nipa palm, and it's probably half the length, you know, round. It's a very big cone, and that cone alone, you could probably get like 40 seeds. And then, you know, you cut mangroves, and then mangrove is trying to throw its proper gears. It's probably like 5 per 3, and then you have Nipa palm of 40 for one tree. So I think we have to keep the mangrove degradation as minimum as possible. And then the other point is to try and find a resource for mangrove, for Nipa palm. I know it's difficult, like any palm, it's thorny, it's spiky, it's difficult to assess, but we can't remove all the Nipa palm in Nigeria. Like, it's just too much now. I think it's too late to try and do wide-scale remediation. Maybe in some areas in River State where it's not that big of a deal, or not River State, in the core Niger Delta, maybe towards Bayelsa and Delta, but in River State, it's already that. Like, I remember one field trip I went for in Kono, and it's just taking over that entire place as well. And the last point is we need to do some sort of policy where we either make sure that laws of mangrove degradation is being implemented, or a way of utilizing mangrove species, Nipa species, sorry. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Do we have an intervention response from Dr. Rowley?
Okay, I think in addition to what he has said, I think for me, I would look at it in a different direction, because based on our studies, we discovered that why the Nipa palm is having an upper hand is because of the soil changes. No matter what you do, as long as there's anthropogenic effect, the Nipa palms will still overtake the mangroves, because the mangroves are habitat specialists. So the kind of soil they grow that most of us know, they call chikuku. When we are small, you know, there's a particular name. Those of you from that area, they call them chikuku. So they are changed to sandy soil. And since mangroves are habitat specific, they can't grow in muddy, sandy soil. So once human beings start dumping waste, most of you will agree with me, those people living along those coastal areas, the riverine area, they use the coast for bathroom, they use it for dumping their waste. So when they keep putting this thing there, the soil changes from that chikoko soil to sandy soil. So no matter the kind of remediation you do there, it's just a matter of a year or two. The seedlings will die off because they won't grow. But that's one of the major concepts. There's a publication I have, a kind of innovative, experiment called the soil replacement technique. If you want the Nipa palms to leave the Niger Delta, you have to replace all the soil, which is not possible, like what he's saying. But there are some areas that the land extent, the landscape it has covered. You just can't do it. But they say a race of 1,000 miles start with a step. So if we want to win the war, we have to win the battle. And the battle is we don't need to mess up the soil through hydrocarbon pollution, through waste disposal, and other effects. So that's my own recommendation. We have to attack the soil. If we attack the soil, then we'll solve the problem of the palm in the Niger Delta area and the world in general.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll just, okay, I see one hand up, just one more contribution.
My name is Uche Izuchukwu. I work for HiPrep, the mangrove restoration officer there. The science of Nipa palm is, you can look at it from many dimensions, especially like he mentioned and they mentioned. They are all right. We've gotten satellite imageries, and when we go to the field, they tell you this place is 100% mangrove cover. But when you go to the field, it's all Nipa palm. And most times those satellite images are not correct. It's always better to use ground truthing when monitoring mangroves. But in the case of Niger Delta, I think to answer your question, the best thing is to take Nipa palm out. I think that's the only solution. Whenever you're intervening, you just take them out. Because as long as there's degradation in that particular mangrove ecosystem, Nipa palm will always outcompete mangrove. So the only way to stop it is to take them out and monitor that area. As long as they keep coming up, you take it out. If you go to, I work in the Ogoni part of River State, and if you're conversant with those areas, if you come to Kana, in Kana, there are mangrove habitat that's completely taken over by Nipa palm. And evidence to show you that my mangroves were there before, just stick a shovel in the soil. You'll see Chikoko roots there, but Nipa palm is everywhere. So the point is, you have to recover those ecosystems back. And the only way to do it is to take that Nipa palm back. Because no matter how you look at it, mangroves are always better than Nipa palm in terms of timber, biodiversity. So we need to devise a strategy to take them out. And it's difficult, but we have to start somewhere. I think that's the only solution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Oh, answer popping up. We need to move now. I thought we had recovered some time, but if these hands are to be recognized to make interventions, then we would slide back again. So I'd like to apologize to you. We'll still have other opportunities to make interventions, to ask questions, to make contributions. So at this point, we would need to proceed